Many of us dream of being marooned on a desert island a la Lost, Survivor, or Lord of the Flies. That's all fine and dandy when you imagine beaches, waterfalls, plentiful supplies of fresh mangoes and papaya, a sea full of fish, and a harem of air stewards and stewardesses to populate the island with. But the reality was an entirely different tale for Brazilian pilot Antônio Sena when his plane went down in the middle of the Amazon jungle where everything wants to eat or kill you. Today, we'll learn all about Antonio's fight for survival in the harshest environment on the planet, how he trekked through the jungle for a month through crocodile and snake-infested swamps, eating fruit and surviving on birds' eggs. But before we start our story, smash the like button. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Even before his plane crashed, it was an unforgettable day for Antônio Sena. The 35-year-old pilot had been hired for his maiden assignment working for illegal wildcat miners. His first solo mission was to ferry supplies to an outlawed gold mine in Pará state. Known as the California, the remote mine featured a newly created landing strip smack bang in the middle of the Amazon jungle. Born in Santarém, a small city where the Amazon and Tapajos rivers meet, Antonio trained to be a pilot and racked up 2,400 hours of flight time. But several years ago, looking for a change of pace, he opened a small restaurant in his native city. That is until COVID-19 restrictions forced him to close his bar. Desperate for work, when he was offered the job of ferrying cargo for illegal miners, Toninho reluctantly accepted. Desperate times call for desperate measures. On the morning of January 28, 2021, 2 days before his 36th birthday, Toninho took off in a 48-year-old single-propeller Cessna 210L from the North Brazilian town of Alenquer on the northern banks of the Amazon. As he flew over the rainforest, everything was hunky-dory. Cruising effortlessly at 3,000 feet, it's safe to say that Antonio would have been in a buoyant mood. He was being paid for his first piloting gig in a while, the sun was shining, and there was an infinite expanse of blue sky above the horizon while lush, verdant green rainforest whizzed past below. This was the life, every pilot's dream, man and machine in perfect harmony. Until, without warning, from out of nowhere, the Cessna's lone engine suddenly cut out. Faced with life and death, Antonio had to think quickly. He scanned the endless expanse of green below for somewhere, anywhere to attempt a crash landing. You see, in addition to the whole crashing in the middle of the most immense jungle on the planet, Antonio faced a more immediate problem. The cargo he was carrying was a highly flammable 160 gallons of diesel. He was sitting inside a giant crashing Molotov cocktail. As the Cessna hurtled towards the ground, Antonio scanned for a clearing where he could attempt a crash landing. Then, a glimmer of hope appeared as he saw a suitable spot. There! Palm trees mean there is water, perhaps a river, he thought to himself. So he pointed his light aircraft towards the small valley lined with trees and prayed like he'd never prayed before. On his way down, Toninho sent a Mayday message over his portable radio, including his soon-to-be crash site. He hoped anyone might be listening. Scraping tops of trees and landing violently, the Cessna came to a halt amongst those palm trees and red clay earth. Antonio was alive but dazed. No sooner as the plane stopped came his next problem. He was covered head to foot in gasoline, and the aircraft was about to blow any second. Antonio managed to unhook himself from his seat and grabbed whatever he could lay his hands on. A backpack, 3 bottles of water, 4 soft drinks, some bread, a pocket knife, some rope, an emergency kit, a flashlight, 2 lighters, and his phone, and got the hell out of there. The plane burst into flames minutes later. Not only had Antonio survived his quickly improvised landing, but he had also escaped relatively unscathed. Soon it dawned on him that he was stranded in the middle of the world's largest rainforest, population 1. So, he took a deep breath and settled down to wait for his rescuers. Only, they didn't come. For the first week, Antonio made a makeshift camp next to the remains of the ancient wrecked Cessna. He believed that staying near the wreckage would be his best chance of being spotted. Antonio was right. Well, half right. Search and rescue pilots did indeed circle the area for several days, but always buzzed on past. Our intrepid hero made fires from damp wood and waved and screamed, presumably like a lunatic, every time he heard the whir of overhead propeller planes. Unfortunately, all his efforts were in vain. Whenever search and rescue planes circled overhead, the undergrowth proved so dense that the rescuers couldn't spot him. "They flew right over, but couldn't see me," Antonio reported. The Amazon jungle is a little over 2 million square miles. It contains half the world's rainforest and is almost the size of the entire contiguous United States, so the phrase "like finding a needle in a haystack" may spring to mind. But in this instance, perhaps it's necessary to invent a more appropriate phrase, like finding an atom in a haystack. After an entire week, it dawned on Antonio that the search and rescue mission had been called off. After that, he didn't hear the buzz of any more planes and assumed they had given him up for dead. I was emotionally devastated when I realized the search operations were over. "It's the only time I thought I wasn't going to make it, that I was going to die," said the sports-loving, fitness-mad pilot. When it became abundantly clear that help was not coming from the sky, Tonino knew that he had to rely on Mother Nature. He told himself his priorities were always to look for water and try to look for food. I knew I was facing a life-or-death situation. He made the somewhat surprising decision to start walking east towards where he had spotted 2 airstrips from the plane. He was certain that an area by the Peru River, approximately 60 miles away, was inhabited. Yeah, inhabited by jaguars. Antonio turned on his phone one last time. Using the very last dregs of the battery on his dying phone, he launched a geolocation app, memorized the map, and took off into the unknown like Marlowe into the heart of darkness. Remembering what he could from a survival course he had once taken, Antonio walked for days. First, he walked only in the mornings, using the position of the morning sun to stay on course and head back east toward the Peru River and hopefully civilization. Armed with his trusty pocket knife, he waded through the snake, crocodile, and mosquito-infested swamps. Without the requisite machete, he was forced to duck and weave through thick vines for hours at a time. Where the canopy is so dense, the forest floor is almost completely dark. So in the afternoons, he would stop walking and set up a campsite, using palm trees and branches to shelter him from the rain. Yes, folks, the Amazon rainforest is one of the wettest places on Earth, so even the elements were against Antonio. Worse, Antonio was at the mercy of predators. 10% of all species in the world can be found in the Amazon rainforest, and most of them will eat, bite, sting, poison, or electrocute you. There was water, but no food, and I was vulnerable, exposed to predators. He knew only too well that animals most often hunt near water, where prey is most abundant. Having become prey himself, he wisely slept on hills away from water to avoid jaguars, rattlesnakes, boa constrictors, deadly wasps, stinging bullet ants, and bird-eating tarantulas as large as dinner plates. Then there are the poison dart frogs, Brazilian wandering spiders, thought to be the most venomous spider in the world, and more poisonous plants than you can shake a stick at. The Amazon is still also thought to contain up to 50 uncontacted tribes, which may be friendly or might cook and eat you. And that's just on land. The waters of the Amazon and its thousands of surrounding tributaries are even worse. The magnificent river is the largest by volume in the world and can reach a staggering 120 miles in width during the rainy season. In short, that's 4,345 miles by 120 miles of nightmarish monsters, and every single one of them wants to end you. The muddy brown waters are chock full of giant anacondas that can inhale and digest you whole, electric eels who gang up to shock you to death, and flesh-eating red-bellied piranha fish that can turn you into a chicken carcass in minutes. Mercifully, there are stretches of the river without Amazonian bull sharks, but only because the crocodiles ate them all. Day after day, Antonio continued trekking through the blistering jungle, building lean-to shelters for protection. Yet, he was constantly besieged by territorial spider monkeys intent on destroying them. Despite the nuisance, these monkeys unknowingly helped save his life. Watching them eat a bright pink fruit called brew, he realized it was safe and made it his primary food source, supplementing it with small bird eggs for protein. Starving and alone for over a month, Antonio had covered just 17 miles of dense forest. On his 35th day, after 3 days without food, he heard a buzzing sound. It was a chainsaw. The noise meant humans could be nearby, but fearing he might get lost in the dark, he decided to stay put. That night he prayed, hoping to hear the sound again. His gamble paid off. The next morning he heard the chainsaw once more and continued east. By late afternoon on March 6, 2021, he stumbled upon a tarpaulin. Lifting it, he discovered a basket of chestnuts, tools, and water. Nearby, a man was cracking nuts. Following the trail, he reached a group of chestnut collectors who raised the alarm, marking the end of his 5-week survival ordeal. The group was led by 67-year-old Maria Jorge dos Santos Tavares, whose family had been gathering nuts in the forest for decades. They hadn't ventured so deep into the jungle in 3 years, but financial hardship following Maria's husband's death during the pandemic had forced them back. By sheer fate, both Antonio and Maria's family had been driven to the same remote part of the jungle by desperation. Maria and her family gave Antonio food, water, clean clothes, and shelter. She then used a radio to contact her daughter, Miriam, in a nearby town, asking her to inform Antonio's mother, Rolene. Initially skeptical, Rolene was eventually convinced her son was alive. Miriam shared her own family's hardship, telling them, "We lost a life and you gained one. I suppose that's the way God wanted it." Maria ensured Antonio's safe departure before returning to the forest to continue collecting nuts. After 36 grueling days, Antonio was airlifted out by a police helicopter. The emotional reunion with his family was broadcast on Brazilian TV. He was treated for dehydration and minor injuries, having lost 55 pounds during his ordeal. Speaking to reporters, he confessed, "The only thing that kept me strong was my love for my family, the desire to see my parents and siblings again." It's a story of love and faith. Locals called his survival a true miracle. Antonio reflected on the untouched beauty of the rainforest. The Amazon is not a single forest, but 4 or 5 forests that mingle, he observed. His experience shed light on Brazil's illegal mining industry, which thrives in indigenous territories meant to be protected. The illegal mine he was flying to before getting lost was deep in the Maicuru Reserve, where human activity is restricted except for conservation efforts. The Amazon, often called the world's lungs, provides a third of the planet's oxygen, yet deforestation has claimed 17% of it in the last 50 years. Thousands of illegal gold mines scar the landscape, contaminating rivers with mercury. Even before his ordeal, Antonio considered himself an Amazonian, but surviving the jungle deepened his connection to it. "If I had fallen somewhere in a deserted plantation, I wouldn't have had water, shelter, or food," he realized. The Amazon is so rich. His ordeal had given him a new perspective on the very industry he worked for.